If you've ever wondered whether there's any point in studying literature or in reading books at all, you're in good company. Some of the finest minds of the Victorian period approached those questions, and fortunately, they've given us answers. Most students I teach are aware of a historical change in how readers perceived the purpose of their own reading. The English literary tradition was originally instructive. European printing procedures were developed specifically to reproduce the Bible. Therefore, at its inception, publishing in Britain was bound to religion. And for a very long time, whatever the literary form, lessons were integral to whatever books were published. And this relaxed over time, particularly with the rise of the novel in the 18th century. However, if books were no longer overtly instructive, neither did they become mere distraction like a 1,000-piece jigsaw or a game of solitaire. The notion became popular that people should not be told what to think, but that they should be encouraged to reflect, and that this could be accomplished in literature and various other cultural forms. For example, in his novel Dombey and Son, Charles Dickens raises the question of the interrogative mind explicitly. It might be worthwhile sometimes to inquire what nature is and how men work to change her, and whether, in the enforced distortion so produced, it is not natural to be unnatural. Nature here means human nature, and the point is to wonder whether we have started to live our lives in ways which enforce conditions contrary to human nature. George Eliot, the pen name of Mary Ann Evans, saw the purpose of culture as to enhance our emotional connections with other people. The greatest benefit we owe to the artist, whether painter, poet, or novelist, is the extension of our sympathies. Art is the nearest thing to life. It is a mode of amplifying experience and extending our contact with our fellow men beyond the bounds of our personal lot. Calling attention to the effectiveness of realism, she stresses the need to extend our capacity for sympathy. Sympathy, in its true sense, is a two-way street. A sympathetic person has the capacity to show compassion as well as deserving it of other people. Of her own work, which included the novel Middlemarch, amongst others, Eliot wrote as follows: "The only effect I ardently long to produce by my writings is that those who read them should be better able to imagine and to feel the pains and joys of those who differ from themselves in everything but the broad fact of being struggling, erring human creatures." So reading broadens our horizons. It enables us to enter the minds of people whom we might have assumed were different from us, but fundamentally we find that they are the same. Comparably, we might look to one of the key figures in how we think about literature and literary criticism nowadays, the poet and critic Matthew Arnold. Arnold felt that in an age of unrelenting social and technological advancement, poetry had a special function. Mankind will discover that we have to turn to poetry to interpret life for us, to console us, to sustain us. Without poetry, our science will appear incomplete, and most of what now passes with us for religion and philosophy will be replaced by poetry. Science, I say, will appear incomplete without it. Our religion, parading evidences such as those in which the popular mind relies now, our philosophy, pluming itself on its reasonings about causation and finite and infinite being, what are they but the shadows and dreams and false shows of knowledge? The day will come when we shall wonder at ourselves for having trusted to them, for having taken them seriously. And the more we perceive their hollowness, the more we shall prize the breadth and finer spirit of knowledge offered to us by poetry. High praise for poetry there. Arnold makes his point by quoting from Wordsworth. In another essay, he goes even further to argue that poetry is superior to religion. Religion, Arnold says, bases itself on facts which it can't prove, whereas poetry is based on ideas which are permanent and infallible. Arnold also spoke about the purpose of literary criticism. And of his own criticism, he said, his point wasn't to persuade, to force an interpretation on people, but he felt that his literary criticism represented what he called his best self or his true self, and he hoped that in turn it would stimulate the best selves of the audience. What is at stake are our capacities for judgment, which Arnold says, cultivated in literature, can be applied into other fields. It is the business of the critical power, as I said in the words already quoted, in all branches of knowledge, theology, philosophy, history, art, science, to see the object as in itself it really is. Thus, it tends at last to make an intellectual situation of which the creative power can profitably avail itself. It tends to establish an order of ideas, if not absolutely true, yet true by comparison with that which it displaces, to make the best ideas prevail. Presently, these new ideas reach society. The touch of truth is the touch of life, and there is a stir and growth everywhere. His watchword is disinterestedness, which Arnold uses in its correct sense to mean judgment that is free from bias. So these are transferable skills. You might major in literary studies at Monash and subsequently become a dairy farmer, seemingly unrelated fields, but you would bring your enhanced capacity for reflection and deliberation into new areas. Such processes, Arnold said, should be encouraged implicitly. Literature shouldn't be an instruction manual. Literature should blend what he called the sweetness of aesthetic pleasure with the light of intellectual improvement. However, other writers would shy away from literature having even that kind of sugar-coated mission. Take Oscar Wilde, for example, who writes in the preface to The Picture of Dorian Gray, "There is no such thing as a moral or an immoral book. Books are well written or badly written, that is all." As though there's no point in trying to detect any higher purpose to a literary work. One should just enjoy the thing. We should expect, though, that authors would disagree in an age that was complex, one whose own inhabitants characterized it as contradictory.